The Clicking Sound Coming from Our New Cat by Milky the Squid. My entire life, my parents owned the same cat, Bubs, an adorable orange tabby who lived outdoors more often than in. I grew up in a quaint little town in Maine that was stunningly beautiful, crashing waves and endless moody skies and plenty of grassy places to bound about and climb trees, as both children and their outdoor cats do. Bubs was always there for me, purring on my lap and rubbing my leg when returning from a frolic in the woods. As I grew into a teenager, he stayed the same size and aged gracefully. But one day, he was missing. I asked my father, who broke the news. He'd been hit by a car and been killed. My mother was deeply distraught, more so than I, and I tried to cheer her up. But the next week, she had a sad, distant look about her until nearly a month after, when she found the kitten. We'd been on a walk along the rocks of the nearby bay shore on a particularly windy day, just about half an hour from our house when we heard the cry. An adorable gray kitten emerged from some tall grass, mewing and sniffing at our feet with a high-pitched, heart-melting little voice. He looked to be about 3 months old, and had a dappling of black spots on his back. My mom picked him up and gazed at him with her loving eyes as only she could so perfectly do for the four-legged stranger. Dad raised an eyebrow at me and smiled. No words needed to express what we both knew. We had a new pet cat. Pip, as my mom had been referring to him in the next few days, was an adorable new friend, but he sometimes made a strange clicking sound. It was almost always when he was conked out or asleep. And it wasn't loud exactly, but it was pretty odd. I asked my mom about it and she just chalked it up to the ocean air. But something about it seemed off and actually creeped me out a bit. He'd be walking around playing with string, then would plop down for a nap. And then that sound would bubble up out of him instead of a snore, which I would have been more than happy to listen to. The clicking just seemed so out of place. Mom was back to her joyous self, though, so I tried not to dwell on it. The next few days I'd wished I only had an off-putting click to deal with. Around the 5th day of being proud cat owners we'd returned to being, I'd noticed some peculiar behavior. Pip would occasionally move in a rapid kind of scuttling that seemed so unnatural and foreign for a cat. I'd looked up cat videos trying to see what kind of condition this might be, and discovered feline cerebral hypoplasia, an issue with an underdeveloped cerebellum. But even that looked far different to the rapid movements he'd make. On top of that, he was clicking more often, and the putrid stink of his litter box seemed to hang on him at all times. I told my mom, once she finally returned from the post office where she works, and she just told me with a smile to give him a bath, silly. I walked over and picked him up and realized he felt unhealthy, very bony. I frowned but took him to the tub and began to wash him. I coated him twice with shampoo, but he still had a lingering stink. I finally gave up, and when I went to pick him out of the water, I screamed in pain and stared at my bleeding finger. There was a straight slice into it, not a bite like I was expecting. I shook him angrily, not too hard, and yes, I felt horrible about doing so. He stared at me with his unfeeling black orbs of eyes and began to make that awful clicking sound again. I kept my distance when drying him with the towel again, confused at how he felt so bony and skinny, but was the same size the entire time we'd had him. I began staying clear of Pip. On Monday, about 3 days of avoidance aside from the odor, which caused my mom to purchase some Yankee candles for the house, my father expressed concern. She realized that this was abnormal, so we'd made a vet appointment on her first day off, that Thursday. I saw Pip peering at me under the table during dinner that night, and as I cleared the table to do dishes, he did some violent crunching motion, like he was compacting from front to back, which made my heart skip a beat, and then the blood drained from my face. It was completely unnatural, like a compressing accordion, and I ran in horror to my parents' room where they assured me the vet would take care of whatever was wrong. I tried to explain that this wasn't me overreacting, but there seemed to be no way to convince her. Upon exiting the room, I saw Pip sitting calmly and staring at me with those bulging black orbs. They seemed to be pulsating slightly, or almost jutting outward, and the whole room smelled the acrid stench of death. I ran to my room, not taking my eyes off of him. I locked my door last night for the first time. Today I awoke to a muffled sound of crying and entered the living room to find my mother in tears. On the carpet beside her lay the lifeless body of Pip, but it looked like he'd been slaughtered violently, deflated, and split. There was a trail of blood leading out of his back end that faded out after a few feet, and tiny footprints in the drying blood on the carpet. They were claw prints. I swear they looked like lobster claw prints, or more so a crab's. I tried to console my mom and said, "He was sick and it wasn't our fault." But she shook her head, face strained with despair, and she said she doesn't care about the cat. She just motioned a limp arm to the kitchen after wiping tears from her eyes. I slowly walked over, following the direction of trailing blood to meet my father's blank eyes staring at me, and listened in utter horror as he slowly opened his mouth wide and made the familiar sound of clicking.